Before you start watching, drop your city in the comments. We've got viewers tuning in from all across Canada, and honestly, it never gets old seeing where you're all watching from. And if this is your first time here at Ivory Secrets, welcome. Hit subscribe. You're going to want to be here for what comes next. Now, let's talk about Marguerite Holloway. Wait, scratch that. Wrong story. Let's talk about a woman whose name most people in this story never bothered to learn properly. Her name was Audrey Beaumont, 43 years old, senior partner at one of the oldest environmental law firms in Vancouver. The kind of woman who read contracts the way other people read bedtime stories. Carefully, quietly, and always to the end. She had dark hair she kept pulled back during the week. She wore the same pearl studs her grandmother had left her, regardless of where she was going. She drove a 7-year-old Subaru, not because she couldn't afford better, but because she genuinely couldn't see the point. And on a Tuesday evening in late October, she stood in the kitchen of the home she had shared with her husband for 11 years and listened very, very carefully while he explained why he would not be attending his mother's 70th birthday dinner. "I have a thing," Warren said. He didn't look up from his phone. Audrey set down the dish she was drying. "A thing. A work thing. It came up. Your mother is turning 70, Warren." He finally looked up, and there was something in his face that she had been cataloging for roughly 14 months. A particular combination of irritation and guilt that she had come to think of as his tell. He wore it the way bad poker players wear every hand they've ever been dealt. "She'll understand," he said. Audrey said nothing. She picked the dish back up and finished drying it. She put it in the cabinet. She turned off the kitchen light. She had learned something important over the past 14 months. The moment you stop asking questions is the moment you start getting answers. Warren's mother was named Elspeth Beaumont. She was 70 years old, 5'2", and had the posture of a woman who had been told her whole life to sit up straight, and had decided at some point to take that advice to a militant extreme. She had built Beaumont Capital Group from a regional asset management firm into something that occupied 4 floors of a glass tower in downtown Vancouver, and employed 312 people, which she could tell you, because she had counted. She had never particularly liked Audrey when Warren first brought her home. She had come around, slowly. People sometimes come around to things they initially resist. Not because those things became easier, but because they proved themselves to be exactly what they appeared to be. Audrey was patient. She was consistent. She did not perform warmth she did not feel, but the warmth she did feel was genuine, and she showed it in practical ways. She remembered things. She followed through. She showed up. Elspeth had begun to watch her daughter-in-law very carefully about 2 years ago. She had noticed things that a mother notices when she loves her son, but is not entirely blind to what he has become. The birthday dinner was held at a private room in a Yaletown restaurant that Elspeth had chosen because the acoustics were good and the lighting was kind to everyone over 50. There were 22 guests. Warren was not among them. Audrey arrived alone and sat beside Elspeth, and when Elspeth asked where Warren was, Audrey said simply, "He had a work obligation that came up suddenly. He sends his love." Elspeth looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "He doesn't, but thank you for saying so." Audrey picked up her water glass. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. "I want to show you something after dinner," Elspeth said quietly. "Don't let me forget." What Elspeth showed her was a folder. They were in the back of a car, headed home, and Elspeth took the folder from the interior pocket of her coat, with the careful movements of someone who had been carrying it for a while and was ready, finally, to set it down. "Our firm's internal auditor flagged some irregularities 8 months ago," Elspeth said. She kept her voice even, the way you keep your voice even when the thing you're saying is enormous, and you have decided that enormous things deserve to be spoken plainly. Executive expense accounts, vendor payments routed through a shell company registered in Alberta. The amounts, individually, are not catastrophic. Together they are significant. Audrey looked at the folder. She did not open it. "How significant?" she said. $412,000. The car moved through the wet October streets. The lights of the Granville Bridge smeared yellow in the rain. "Warren runs your Western Operations Division," Audrey said, "and the shell company. It was registered to a holding company. We traced it. It belongs to a woman named Sinclair. Tara Sinclair. She's 31. She works as a freelance event coordinator, as far as we can tell." Elspeth paused. "She has been living in a condo in Kitsilano for the past 2 years. The condo is not in her name. It was purchased through a numbered company with a mailing address that traces back to Warren's assistant's former address." Audrey opened the folder then. She looked at the first page for a long time. "You've had this for 8 months, she said. "I needed to be sure." Elspeth's voice was very steady. "And I needed to know what I wanted to do about it." "What do you want to do about it?" Elspeth turned to look at her daughter-in-law in the dark of the car. Her expression was not one of a woman asking for help. It was one of a woman who had already decided and was extending something. "I want to do what's right," she said. "For the company and for you." Here is what Audrey did not do. She did not call Warren that night. She did not confront him. She did not lie awake spiraling. She went home. She made herself a cup of chamomile tea she did not particularly want, and she sat at the kitchen table for approximately 45 minutes while the rain came down outside and the house made its settling noises around her. Then she went to her home office, opened her laptop, and began to read. She had been a lawyer for 17 years. She knew what financial misconduct looked like, and she knew what it meant. She also knew, and this was the part that kept her sitting at her desk until 2 in the morning, that she needed to understand exactly where she stood before she moved an inch in any direction. She pulled up the paperwork on the house. She pulled up the joint accounts. She pulled up the documentation on a property in Whistler that Warren had purchased 4 years ago, and that he had told her was a firm investment, a tax write-off, something to do with client entertainment. She pulled up the registry on the Whistler property and read the ownership details very carefully. Then she sat back. The property was in Warren's name alone. That wasn't what he had told her. He had told her it was jointly held. He had shown her paperwork. She could remember him sliding it across the kitchen table, pointing to a line near the bottom. She had been in the middle of a deadline that week, and she had signed where he indicated. She went to find the copy of what she had signed. It was not what he had shown her. It was not, in fact, related to the Whistler property at all. She sat with that for a long time. There's a particular kind of stillness that comes over people who are very, very good at their jobs when those jobs suddenly become personal. It's not coldness. It's not detachment. It's something more like clarity, the kind that only comes when the noise of hurt and disbelief gets quiet enough that you can hear yourself think. Audrey had that kind of stillness. Over the next 6 weeks, she worked quietly. She consulted a family lawyer she trusted, not a colleague, not someone in Warren's orbit, but a woman named Dr. Petrolaise McInnes, who practiced out of an office in New Westminster and who had the reputation of being, in the words of one mutual acquaintance, terrifyingly thorough. She coordinated with Elspeth's legal team. She documented what could be documented and declined to touch what couldn't be touched yet. She did not let on at home that anything had changed. This was harder than it sounds. Warren was still present, in his way, coming home for dinner 3 or 4 nights a week, asking about her cases, in a general way that suggested he was not listening to the answers. Occasionally touching her shoulder as he passed her in the kitchen in a way that felt automated. Now, like a gesture his body remembered, even though the intention behind it had gone somewhere else entirely. She noticed the text he angled away from her. She noticed the Friday that ran later and later. She noticed that he had started wearing a different cologne. She filed all of it away. Elspeth Beaumont's retirement announcement was not a surprise. She had been talking about stepping back for years in the way that people talk about things they mean but keep deferring. And when she finally named a date, the 2nd week of December at the firm's annual end-of-year event, there was a general sense of the inevitable made official. The annual event was held at the Fairmont Pacific Rim. It was, by any measure, a significant evening. 240 guests, the board of directors, major clients, long-standing partners. The kind of room where things got announced and where, once announced, they became real. Warren had assumed without ever examining that assumption, that when his mother stepped back from Beaumont Capital, the Western Operations Division would fall to him in a more formalized way. He had operated as though this were a foregone conclusion for the better part of 3 years. He had mentioned it to Tara on several occasions. He had allowed it to shape how he moved through rooms. He arrived at the Fairmont in a very good suit, with the particular confidence of someone who believes the evening is already decided. Audrey arrived separately. She wore a dark green dress and the pearl studs. She greeted people she knew with genuine warmth. She accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and stood near the window for a moment, looking out at the harbor. Tara Sinclair was also at the event. She had been brought as a guest of one of the firm's junior partners, a young man named Bryce, who genuinely had no idea what he had walked into. Tara was well-dressed and careful. She knew what this evening represented, and she had told herself that she would simply be present and composed, and that when the announcement came and Warren's position solidified, everything would begin to shift in the direction she had been waiting for. She had been waiting a long time. She spotted Audrey from across the room, and something in her settled into a kind of cool assessment. She had seen photographs. She had constructed a version of Audrey in her mind, vague, bookish, someone who had been left behind in a marriage that had run its course. A placeholder. The woman standing at the window looked nothing like that. She looked, if Tara was honest with herself, and she usually wasn't, like someone who knew exactly where she was and why. Dinner was 8 courses and ran long, the way these things do when the people are important enough that no one rushes them. Elspeth sat at the head of the room and was toasted by 3 separate people. She received each toast with a gracious economy that made it clear she had been toasted many times and still found it marginally embarrassing. Warren sat at a table near the center of the room, which was, he had decided, appropriate for someone about to be made central. Audrey sat beside Elspeth. This was not an accident. The formal portion of the evening began just past 9 o'clock. Elspeth stood, and the room went quiet with the particular efficiency of rooms in which everyone is used to paying attention to one person. She spoke about the firm for a few minutes, its history, its values, the things she was most proud of. She was a good speaker. She had always been a good speaker. She did not use notes. Transitions, she said, are only frightening when you haven't planned them properly. I've had 2 years to plan this one. She looked at her board, her partners, the assembled faces of people who had, in various ways, trusted her with significant things. Beaumont Capital will be led going forward by its new CEO, she said. Someone who has spent the past 2 years working closely with our governance team, our legal counsel, and our investor relations committee. Someone who understands what this firm is built on and has demonstrated, in ways both visible and not, an absolute commitment to its integrity. Warren set down his fork. Audrey Voss Beaumont, Elspeth said. The silence lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Then the room responded. Genuine applause, the warm, slightly surprised kind that comes when something that makes complete sense has nonetheless managed to be unexpected. Audrey stood. She was composed. She had been composed all evening, but this composure was different. It was the composure of someone who has been holding something carefully for a long time and has now, finally, been given a safe place to set it down. She thanked Elspeth. She thanked the board. She said something brief and sincere about the kind of institution Beaumont Capital had been built to be and the kind she intended to help it remain. She did not look at Warren. She did not need to. Warren found her near the end of the evening, on a terrace that looked out over the water. The night was cold and clear. The lights of the North Shore made their reflections in the inlet. He looked like a man who had been trying to arrange his expression for about 45 minutes and had not quite managed it. You knew, he said. You knew this was coming. Audrey considered the question carefully. I knew some of it. Your mother didn't tell me the announcement until a few weeks ago. The rest of it, she paused. I figured out on my own. The rest of it, the audit Warren. He went very still. The shell company, she said. The Kitsilano condo. The documentation discrepancies on the Whistler property. She said it all in the same tone. She might have used to walk through a file with a junior associate. matter of fact, without flourish. The board has been briefed. Petra Lai has been working with the firm's legal team for 6 weeks. It's all been handled very carefully. He opened his mouth. Don't, she said, not unkindly, just clearly. There isn't a version of this conversation that ends well for you tonight, and I think you know that. The water moved below them. Somewhere inside, someone had started up a playlist, something low and easy, the kind of music that means the important part of the evening is over. I'm sorry, he said finally. She looked at him. The pearl studs, the dark green dress, the stillness she had been cultivating for over a year. I know you are, she said. I also know that it took losing everything for you to get there, and I'm not sure what to do with that yet. She picked up her glass of sparkling water. She turned to go back inside. The divorce paperwork is at the house, she said, without turning around. Petra Lai prepared it. It's thorough. You should have your own counsel look at it. She went back into the warmth and the light. What happened afterward was not a single moment. It was dozens of small ones, accumulated over weeks and months, in the way that real things accumulate. Warren retained a lawyer. The financial misconduct investigation proceeded through proper channels, a process that Elspeth had deliberately handed to an independent firm because she understood that doing it any other way would compromise the outcome. The findings, when they came, were what they were. Restitution was negotiated. His role at the firm ended quietly in January. Tara Sinclair left Vancouver in February. She had not, in the end, gotten very much. The Kitsilano condo was seized as part of the recovery process. The numbered company dissolved. The young man named Bryce, who had brought her to the Fairmont without understanding anything that was happening, had stopped returning her calls sometime in late November, which she decided to take as a general sign. Audrey moved into the role with a thoroughness that surprised some people and surprised others not at all. She hired good people. She listened more than she spoke in meetings, which made people feel heard, and then she made clear, considered decisions which made them feel safe. She had a reputation within 6 months for being formidable in exactly the way her mother-in-law had been, and in a few ways that were specifically and entirely her own. Elspeth, for her part, retired. She bought a small house on Pender Island and got a dog, a large, impractical golden retriever named Gerald, who was not especially well behaved and whom she adored completely. She and Audrey spoke on the phone every Sunday. The conversations were long and warm and often about nothing important. Once, about 8 months after the Fairmont evening, Elspeth asked her, "Do you regret staying quiet as long as you did?" Audrey thought about it. She thought about the 45 minutes at the kitchen table, the chamomile tea she hadn't wanted, the 2 in the morning, and the property registry and the document that was not the document she had signed. "No," she said. "I needed to understand what I was looking at before I decided what to do about it. You can't build anything solid on a foundation you haven't checked." "Your grandmother's influence," Elspeth said. "Probably," Audrey said. "She was a very careful woman. So are you." Outside the windows of Audrey's office, the city was doing what it does in late June, golden and salt-aired and improbably beautiful. The mountains blew behind it, the harbor catching the light and throwing it back doubled. She had lived here most of her adult life, and it still managed to catch her off guard sometimes, its particular combination of formality and wildness, the way it held both things without apology. She had 40 minutes before her next meeting. She had a brief she needed to finish reading, and a call she needed to return, and a decision she had been sitting with for 3 days that she was fairly certain she was going to make differently than most people expected. She opened the brief. The pearl studs caught the light. She started to read.